My project is on Michelangelo and his life. Michelangelo was a painter, sculptor, architect, and poet who was born March 6, 1475 and died February 18, 1564 at the age of 88. He was considered to be one of the most famous artists of the Italian Renaissance, and he had a great impact on Western art and its development. He was actually the second boy out of 5. He hated school, and he never paid attention. He was always watching the painters at the church, so he would trace them and he would draw them and their movements. At the age of 13, he became an apprentice for a painter, and he studied and worked with him for a year until he started working for the Medici family and sculpting in their gardens. Because he worked for such a powerful family like the Medicis, he actually began to study under a sculptor by the name of Bertoldo di Giovanni, which exposed him to poets, scholars, and he was also able to obtain special permission from the Catholic Church to study cadavers so he can get an insight on anatomy. He actually had to stop that because it had an adverse reaction on his health. Michelangelo loved to document himself, and he loved to write about what was going on in his life, his feelings, his pain, and everything that went on around him. He actually never married, but he did have a devotion to a widow. Her name was Vittoria, and he wrote almost 300 poems and sonnets to her during her time. She actually died in 1547. When he died at 88, it was because of an illness. He died in Rome, and his nephew brought him back to Florence, where he was brought to the public as the father and master of all arts. One of the famous pieces he is most known for is the Sistine Chapel. Pope Julius II actually asked him to paint the Sistine Chapel. He was supposed to sculpt for it, but he wanted it painted by him. It was supposed to have 12 apostles that morphed into 300 figures on the ceiling, but they didn't want that. He actually changed it to doing 3 stories of Adam and Eve and 3 stories of Noah. He had assistants, but he didn't feel like they were good enough for him, so he fired them and he completed the 65-foot ceiling alone. It is believed that he did it on his back, but he actually built a platform for himself so he could stand upright. It is said that 5 million people visit the Sistine Chapel a year. The Sistine Chapel actually has the same dimensions as the Temple of Solomon, which is in the Old Testament. He started this in 1508 and completed it in 1512. This painting is known as The Last Judgment. He was actually shunned for this painting due to him painting naked bodies. Many felt like it was inappropriate in the church and it shouldn't be there. Another one of his most famous sculptures is the Pietà, which was actually one of his first done when he moved to Rome from Florence. A French cardinal of the Pope hired him to sculpt this because he wanted to be remembered when he passed, and he wanted this to be done for his funeral. Michelangelo carved it from a single slab of marble, and it is the only piece he ever signed. He did this when he was 24, and it was actually put behind a bulletproof glass because of the fact that someone tried to attack it with a hammer, and the restoration of it took 10 months. On this sculpture, you can see the movement of the fabric and the skin on Mary holding Jesus. He actually only signed his name on it because he heard other people saying that it belonged to another sculptor, and he wanted people to know that this was his work. Another sculpture he did was the statue of David. Two other artists have actually tried to take on this challenge and they abandoned it. He took it over and it was 17 feet tall and 12,478 pounds. It is entirely made out of marble. It is supposed to depict the story of David and Goliath. And when he finished this, it took 4 days and 40 men to move the statue from his workshop. Because of David's nobility and courage, they actually deemed him as a representative of the city of Florence. Because it was deemed as a representative of Florence, they had it installed in front of one of the government buildings, but it's now in Florence's Accademia Gallery. Michelangelo was an incredible artist and he will always be remembered that way. One of my favorite quotes that he said is, "A man paints with his brains, not with his hands." Michelangelo died with many famous pieces of art under his belt, which is why he will always be remembered.